As King Charles's decision sent shockwaves across the globe, the air around Buckingham Palace became thick with tension. Cameras lined the palace gates, royal commentators speculated endlessly, and yet, no one truly knew what had transpired behind those gilded walls. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The statement released to the press was minimal, formal, cold, almost surgical in tone. It simply read that all royal titles and privileges associated with Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana had been withdrawn, effective immediately, in accordance with the king's decision to maintain the integrity of the royal lineage. No explanations, no elaborations, just silence. And that silence was louder than any words could ever be. Inside the royal household, staff moved like ghosts. Conversations stopped when footsteps approached. Everyone knew something extraordinary had happened, something that could alter the future of the British monarchy forever. The king had reportedly spent the night before the announcement alone in his private study at Clarence House, surrounded by documents, letters, and old family portraits. He had always been a man of reflection, but this time was different. This was a decision not of the heart but of necessity, a decision born out of the burden of truth. He understood that his choice would fracture what was left of his relationship with Harry, but as monarch, he had sworn an oath to the truth above all else. In California, the news hit like a thunderclap. Harry's team, already accustomed to dealing with media storms, scrambled to contain the damage. But there was no containing this. For years, Harry and Meghan had carefully crafted the image of their family. A picture of progressive royalty, love unbound by tradition, and independence from the crown. Now that image was unraveling. Reports began to circulate of Harry's fury, of heated phone calls between him and his father that ended abruptly, of Meghan's tears and disbelief. To the world, they had always been the modern fairy tale couple who escaped the rigidity of royal life for freedom. But now that illusion was beginning to crack. The middle of this storm is where the story becomes both heartbreaking and terrifying. Because beneath the public statements and polished PR responses lies a human tragedy. A father who feels betrayed by his son's secrecy. A son who feels attacked by his father's throne. A family once bound by duty now bound by suspicion. Sources close to the palace described Charles as visibly shaken after receiving the final confirmation that pushed him to act. He had reportedly confided in only two people before signing the decision: Queen Camilla and Princess Anne. Camilla, practical but protective, urged caution, and, ever the stoic realist, reminded her brother that the monarchy's first duty is to truth, not sentiment. In the end, Charles signed the order with a trembling hand and whispered, "It must be done." But what could possibly justify such a monumental decision? The answer, according to insiders, lies in a series of documents that allegedly surfaced during an internal audit of royal archives. The audit, routine in nature, was meant to update royal registries, legal records, and family documentation following Queen Elizabeth's passing. It was then that palace officials reportedly noticed irregularities, missing notations, conflicting hospital data, and inconsistencies in timelines surrounding the births of Archie and Lilibet. Some records that should have been easily verifiable were instead shrouded in ambiguity. And in the royal world, where precision and protocol govern every detail, ambiguity is the enemy of legitimacy. What followed was a quiet, methodical investigation, discreet, but relentless. Trusted aides were sworn to secrecy. Former medical staff were discreetly contacted, and external agencies were reportedly consulted to authenticate documents. As the investigation progressed, the findings became increasingly alarming. Certain birth records could not be authenticated. Hospitals listed in early reports denied public acknowledgement of any royal birth. Even the certificates available through public channels were inconsistent in formatting and signatures. To an ordinary citizen, these may seem like minor clerical errors, but to a monarch guarding a 1,000-year lineage, they were catastrophic red flags. Charles, torn between disbelief and duty, demanded verification. He wanted clarity, and he wanted it quietly. But as the inquiries deepened, the responses grew murkier. A senior royal aide reportedly told a confidant, "Every time we thought we'd found the truth, another door closed." What began as a search for reassurance became a descent into doubt. The king's private investigators traced digital and paper trails, but the deeper they went, the more irregularities surfaced. Some so glaring that even the palace's most loyal advisors couldn't explain them away. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's camp in California continued life as usual, or at least tried to. The couple's focus on media projects, philanthropy, and public appearances masked a growing internal pressure. According to reports, Harry began to sense that something was brewing back home. Calls from palace contacts became shorter, emails went unanswered, and invitations to royal events were quietly withdrawn. Meghan, ever aware of public perception, allegedly urged him to ignore the whispers. But Harry's instincts, shaped by years of royal training, told him something was deeply wrong. The breaking point came when Charles's personal secretary arranged a private video conference between the king and his son. What transpired during that call has been described as devastating. The king, according to palace insiders, spoke in measured tones, explaining that the matter had gone beyond personal boundaries. He informed Harry that official steps were being taken to revoke the titles from Archie and Lilibet pending clarification of the discrepancies. Harry, stunned and emotional, reportedly demanded to know what evidence justified such a decision. Charles refused to elaborate, citing confidentiality and the preservation of royal integrity. The call ended abruptly, with neither side offering reconciliation. From that moment on, the relationship between father and son was shattered beyond repair. Those close to Harry said he was livid, pacing through their Montecito mansion, unable to process what had just occurred. Meghan, furious and defensive, reportedly vowed to protect her family's image at any cost. Her team immediately began drafting statements and coordinating with allies in the press to reframe the narrative. But the royal household remained silent. The silence itself became the story, a calculated, chilling silence that spoke volumes. The end of this introduction marks the beginning of a storm that the royal family may never recover from. For King Charles, this is more than a matter of personal pain. It is a test of his reign, his morality, and his legacy. He has chosen truth over sentiment, honor over comfort. But in doing so, he has ignited a fire that will consume the monarchy's most vulnerable foundation: trust. The days ahead will reveal whether this act of royal reckoning will strengthen the crown or shatter it entirely. And as the world watches, one question remains unanswered. What did King Charles truly discover about Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana that forced him to rewrite royal history itself? The curtain has only just risen on this story, but already the stage is trembling. The truth that the king uncovered is not just a secret. It's a revelation powerful enough to change the monarchy forever. The coming chapters will expose how that truth came to light, who helped uncover it, and how its consequences will echo through royal bloodlines for generations to come. The storm that now surrounds the monarchy did not appear overnight. Like all royal scandals, it began quietly, in the spaces between smiles and handshakes, in the carefully orchestrated photographs that hid more than they revealed. Before King Charles's shocking decision to strip Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana of their titles, there was calm, a deceptive, fragile calm that painted the illusion of a royal family at peace. Chapter 1 begins in that calm, in the years when the world still believed that Harry and Meghan had escaped the royal machine for a life of freedom and love. It was supposed to be a fairy tale. The Sussexes had left the royal fold and settled in California, their every move chronicled by the press. There were lavish interviews, multi-million-dollar deals, and heartwarming soundbites about building a new kind of royal life. Harry spoke of healing, Meghan of independence. Their faces graced magazine covers, and their voices filled television screens. To the public, they appeared to be thriving, a modern, progressive couple redefining what royalty could mean in the 21st century. But beneath the glossy exterior, there was tension. Quiet, unspoken tension that those close to the palace had begun to sense long before the headlines caught up. Royal watchers noticed it first. The details that didn't add up. Archie, born amid secrecy, was rarely seen. The famous photograph of him wrapped in a white blanket, his tiny face barely visible, was shared with such precision it almost looked staged. For months afterward, the public waited for glimpses of the boy, but they were few and far between. Even as he grew older, official appearances were scarce. Some dismissed it as an attempt to protect the child's privacy. Others whispered that it was something more. And when Lilibet Diana was born, the pattern repeated itself. An announcement, a picture-perfect photo, and then silence. Meanwhile, life inside the palace had taken on an odd rhythm. The courtiers who had once handled Harry's correspondence now worked under a cloud of confusion. Invitations to royal events went unanswered. Letters returned unopened. Some within the household had begun to wonder if Harry and Meghan's departure was not merely physical but ideological, a complete severing of trust. And yet, no one could have predicted that those same tensions would later unravel into the most shocking revelation of King Charles's reign. The calm before the storm was deceptive because it was filled with moments that, in hindsight, were warnings. During royal family gatherings, Charles reportedly asked subtle questions about his grandchildren, questions that seemed harmless but carried undertones of unease. How old was Archie now? Was Lilibet walking? Had the children met their cousins recently? Those close to him noticed that his inquiries were often met with vague responses or diversions. Meghan, ever the master of controlling the narrative, would change the topic gracefully. Harry would become defensive, sometimes even irritated. What the king interpreted as secrecy, Harry saw as privacy. But the gap between those two words, privacy and secrecy, was about to widen into a chasm. Back in California, the Sussexes' lives seemed glamorous from the outside. They attended charity galas, hosted celebrity guests, and built their Archwell Foundation into a global brand. Yet the facade of success masked growing isolation. The press, once sympathetic, had turned skeptical. Former allies in Hollywood began to distance themselves quietly, weary of constant controversy. And though the couple continued to project unity, insiders claimed their private conversations were increasingly dominated by tension over image control and the relentless scrutiny of their children. Meghan allegedly insisted on restricting access to their home and digital archives, forbidding unauthorized photos of the kids. It wasn't just a matter of safety, it was about control. The first cracks appeared when palace archivists noticed inconsistencies in the royal family tree updates. Every royal birth is traditionally registered, documented, and archived within the royal collection for lineage verification. But when the Sussex entries were reviewed, discrepancies emerged. The information provided by the Sussex team didn't align with official government records. Initially, it was dismissed as a clerical issue caused by their move abroad. Yet when a second review produced the same inconsistencies, palace advisors began to question the accuracy of the data. It was subtle, dates slightly off, documentation incomplete, signatories untraceable, but in royal history such details are monumental. While these discoveries simmered in silence, the media continued to frame the Sussexes as trailblazers. Their Netflix documentary painted them as victims of palace politics, misunderstood visionaries seeking peace. But what it didn't show were the growing concerns from the very institution they left behind. Behind closed doors, King Charles began requesting periodic updates about his grandchildren's official status. Each report brought more questions than answers. Birthplaces couldn't be verified through traditional channels, hospital staff declined comment, and certain paperwork appeared redacted. To a monarch steeped in tradition and lineage, these gaps were not coincidences, they were warnings. And still, Harry and Meghan projected calm. They released family portraits filled with sunshine and laughter. They celebrated birthdays and milestones through select photographers, carefully choosing angles and lighting that felt almost cinematic. Every image told a story, but not necessarily the full one. The world saw a family at peace. King Charles saw a pattern he could no longer ignore. The middle of this chapter turns to the heart of that illusion. For years, the monarchy has relied on visibility as its greatest tool of legitimacy. Every royal birth, marriage, and christening is witnessed, documented, and verified. But Harry and Meghan had broken that pattern completely. When questioned, they insisted on privacy, Yet the extent of that privacy began to look like concealment. Even among the most understanding members of the royal circle, doubts began to bloom. Could there be a reason beyond personal preference that the Sussexes avoided public validation? It was a question few dared to ask, but one that would soon haunt the king. The calm before the storm was deceptive not because it lacked drama, but because it masked the quiet machinery of truth moving beneath the surface. Royal aides began cross-checking records without Charles's direct order, sensing that something was amiss. What they found only deepened the unease. Files that should have been in the National Archives were missing. Hospital documentation that typically accompanies royal births had been sealed or restricted. Even the christening documentation, an essential part of royal tradition, was unavailable for review. It was as though the trail had been deliberately obscured. And then there was the human element, the unease among royal insiders who had been in direct contact with the Sussexes during key periods. One former aide, speaking under strict anonymity, reportedly described a sense of orchestration whenever the topic of the children arose. Appointments were cancelled last minute. Schedules shifted without notice. And whenever photographic proof of the children was requested for official use, there were delays. Always excuses. For Charles, these fragments of doubt slowly formed a pattern too significant to dismiss. The father in him wanted to trust Harry unconditionally. The king in him couldn't. The monarchy's survival depends on continuity, and continuity depends on truth. If there was even the smallest shadow over the legitimacy of royal heirs, that shadow could destroy centuries of heritage. And so, as the calm continued on the surface, the public appearances, the smiling portraits, the statements about family unity, a silent storm began to gather inside Buckingham Palace. The end of this calm marks the moment the king's suspicion became impossible to contain. It is the moment when silence began to suffocate, when unanswered questions demanded resolution. What began as whispers in the corridors of the palace would soon erupt into full-blown confrontation. The calm before the storm is over. What comes next will expose the truth that shattered trust between a father and son, and between a monarch and his legacy. It began with whispers, soft, uncertain, and easily dismissed. In a place like Buckingham Palace, whispers are as common as the ticking of the clock in the state dining room. But these whispers were different. They were hushed, heavy, and carried a dangerous curiosity. It started with the staff, the longtime attendants who had served generations of royals and knew how to read the unspoken language of the monarchy. They noticed things others missed. Phone calls taken in secret, documents handled with unusual caution, and a king who had become increasingly withdrawn, as if burdened by a truth too painful to share. They didn't know it yet, but the whisper network they formed would become the first thread in unraveling one of the greatest royal deceptions in modern history. The royal household thrives on silence. Every servant, secretary, and advisor knows the unspoken rule. Loyalty is measured by what you don't repeat. But silence also breeds curiosity, and when those closest to power sense secrecy, their instincts take over. A young private secretary, new to the palace, first overheard fragments of a conversation between two senior courtiers. The tone was tense. Words like records, authenticity, and confidential review floated through the air. He didn't understand the full context, but he understood one thing. Something about the royal lineage was under question. Within days, speculation began to circulate quietly among trusted aides. At first, they thought it was about Prince Andrew's controversies or a financial scandal. But the focus was different, sharper, and closer to home. It was about the Sussex children. What triggered the whispers was a single event that seemed ordinary on the surface, a request for a detailed update of all royal heirs and their official titles for the court circular, a long-standing document that records royal activities and lineage. When the entry for Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was reviewed, clerks noticed irregularities in the supporting documentation. Lilibet Diana's record was even more puzzling, containing references to sources that didn't exist within the royal registry. Initially, these anomalies were chalked up to miscommunication between the palace and the Sussexes' American legal representatives. But when follow-up requests for clarification were ignored, curiosity turned into quiet alarm. the whisper network grew. Courtiers began meeting discreetly in unused corridors and the palace gardens, speaking in code, avoiding names. One senior aide reportedly remarked, "There's something off about this. Something the king hasn't told us." Others, loyal to Charles but cautious, refused to speculate aloud. Yet, as more discrepancies surfaced, silence became impossible. Someone from the accounting department mentioned that certain funds allocated for traditional royal ceremonies, like christenings, had never been spent. Another noted that security assignments for events involving the Sussex children were inconsistent, as though the children's presence was never guaranteed. The palace, known for its meticulous precision, was suddenly filled with questions that no one could answer. Outside the palace, a few journalists who specialized in royal affairs began to catch wind of something unusual. They noticed that requests for official information about Archie and Lilibet's royal standing were being denied without explanation. Public records that should have been accessible were mysteriously restricted. To the press, this was suspicious but not yet sensational. After all, the Sussexes' desire for privacy had long been public knowledge. But inside the palace, it was becoming clear that this wasn't about privacy. It was about authenticity. The middle of this unfolding tension revealed a side of King Charles that few had seen before. The monarch who had spent decades preparing for the throne was now faced with a challenge that tested not his diplomacy, but his discernment. He was receiving briefings from his most trusted advisors, each one more concerning than the last. The whispers had reached him, and they were growing louder. According to insiders, Charles held a private meeting late one evening in the Green Drawing Room, a place reserved for moments of historical gravity. Only a handful of senior staff attended. The discussion was said to be somber, filled with phrases like irregular birth documentation, public deception, and legal implications. Those in attendance left pale-faced and shaken. One aide, speaking anonymously years later, recalled that Charles's final words before dismissing the room were haunting. The truth, no matter how painful, must not elude the crown. In the following weeks, the Whisper Network evolved into a quiet investigation. Low-level palace staff began cooperating informally, exchanging notes, cross-referencing timelines, and sharing whatever fragments of information they could find. The atmosphere in the palace became one of polite paranoia. Everyone acted normal in public, but behind closed doors, eyes darted, voices dropped, and the fear of discovery hung over them like fog. Even among those who had served the royal family for decades, the possibility that something so fundamental, so intimate, could be hidden in plain sight was almost unthinkable. Then came a turning point. A mid-level aide in the Royal Communications Office reportedly stumbled upon an internal memo from the Sussexes' representatives in California. The memo referenced alternative documentation procedures for the children's identification records, citing private jurisdiction protections. The phrasing was strange, legalistic, and entirely unfamiliar to British royal protocol. When the aide presented it to her superior, she was told to file it and forget it. But she didn't. Instead, she discreetly copied the memo and shared it with a trusted colleague. Within hours, the document had circulated through the Whisper Network, deepening the sense of unease. Meanwhile, among royal observers outside the palace, subtle changes were noticed in Charles's demeanor during public appearances. His smiles seemed forced, his eyes distant. During one televised engagement, as a child handed him flowers, cameras caught a fleeting moment of sorrow crossing his face. Commentators attributed it to the pressures of kingship, but those within the palace knew better. The king was carrying a secret that could unravel his family's reputation. As whispers grew, so did resistance. Some loyalists within the household believed the entire situation was being exaggerated by palace gossips. Harry is impulsive, yes, but he's not deceitful. one senior valet reportedly said. The king will realize this is all nonsense soon enough. Others were less certain. The king wouldn't be this quiet unless he knew something real, a housekeeper confided to her colleague. And still, the truth remained buried beneath layers of protocol and discretion. By late spring, the Whisper network had expanded beyond the palace. Select officials within the Home Office and even Scotland Yard began to receive discreet inquiries from royal channels regarding archival verification. Each time, the requests were coded, indirect, and carefully worded. They never mentioned names, but everyone involved understood who the inquiries were about. One official later described the tone of these messages as urgent, but terrified. The climax of this chapter came when one of Charles's most trusted confidants, an elderly advisor who had served Queen Elizabeth herself, quietly confronted him. "Your Majesty," he reportedly said, "the truth will come out whether the palace releases it or not. Better it come from you than from the press." Charles, visibly aged by weeks of sleepless nights, said nothing for a long time. Then, softly, he replied, "It's not just truth I'm afraid of. It's what it will do to my son." The end of this chapter marks the moment when whispers transformed into action. The palace could no longer contain what it knew. The Whisper network, once born out of curiosity, had become a catalyst. The truth, whatever it was, had escaped the palace walls, and there was no turning back. What began as murmurs among servants was now a full-blown undercurrent of panic. And as the world continued to admire the Sussexes' carefully curated family life across social media and television screens, the monarchy was bracing for the revelation that would shake its foundations. For King Charles, suspicion didn't arrive as a thunderbolt. It crept in like a slow, unwelcome fog that refused to lift. He had always been a man of reflection, observant and cautious. His life had been one long lesson in patience, watch, wait, endure. But this was different. This was personal. The whispers that had reached him through his closest advisors were no longer rumors he could dismiss as tabloid chatter. They came from the inner circle of his own household, from people whose loyalty was beyond question. And though his heart begged him to believe his son, the evidence unfolding before him suggested something far darker. In the early months of his reign, Charles had focused on unity. He wanted to heal the divisions between the royal family and the Sussexes, to end the cycle of accusations and scandals that had tarnished the monarchy's image. But his attempts at reconciliation were repeatedly met with resistance. Letters went unanswered. Invitations were declined. Even during rare phone calls, Harry's tone was defensive, guarded, and impatient. Charles found himself speaking not as a father but as a negotiator trying to defuse a crisis. And as his frustration grew, so did his sense that Harry was hiding something. Something that went beyond mere anger or rebellion. The first real spark of doubt came during a conversation with his private secretary, Sir Clive Morrow, a man whose entire career had been built on discretion. Clive had requested an unscheduled audience one morning, arriving at the king's private study carrying a slim folder. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "there's been a discrepancy in the official registry of heirs." Charles's brow furrowed. "A discrepancy?" he repeated. Clive nodded, choosing his words like a man walking on glass. "It concerns the birth documentation for the Sussex children." At first, Charles brushed it aside. "They're private citizens now," he said. "Perhaps their paperwork follows American procedure." But Clive didn't move. His silence said what his words could not. Reluctantly, Charles took the folder. Inside were copies of registry notes, legal filings, and correspondence between the Sussex representatives and royal archivists. To the untrained eye, nothing looked unusual. But Charles had been raised in a world where every line of ink mattered. The seals didn't match the official format. The witness signatures were inconsistent. Dates that should have aligned did not. And the document identifying the place of birth, a detail of vital importance for lineage, was marked undisclosed. Charles closed the folder slowly. "Are you suggesting?" he began, then stopped himself. Even the thought felt treacherous. Clive cleared his throat softly. "I am suggesting, Your Majesty, that something requires verification. From that day forward, Charles could no longer shake the unease that gripped him. It followed him through state meetings, ceremonies, and sleepless nights. His dreams were haunted by images of the late Queen, her unwavering commitment to duty echoing in his mind. He remembered her words from years before, "The crown must always stand above sentiment, Charles. Family may falter, but the institution cannot." Those words now felt less like guidance and more like prophecy. Driven by a need for clarity, the king began to gather information discreetly. He ordered no official investigation at first, only quiet verification. His approach was methodical, almost ritualistic. He requested private reports from the Lord Chamberlain's office and instructed his archivists to cross-check records under the guise of routine updates. What he found left him deeply unsettled. The paper trail surrounding Archie and Lilibet's births was thin, incomplete, and oddly fragmented between the UK and US. Hospitals listed by the Sussexes had no record of royal security coordination. Official documentation from California appeared to have been amended months after the births were announced. Charles tried to convince himself that it was bureaucratic chaos. After all, his son and daughter-in-law had stepped away from royal duties. Their processes were no longer under palace control. But the inconsistencies didn't stop there. Certain photographs released by the Sussexes for public relations purposes were analyzed by palace communication teams, who quietly noted discrepancies in timestamps and metadata. While such details might seem trivial, to Charles they pointed toward careful curation, too careful. His suspicion deepened one afternoon while reviewing letters from his late mother's archives. Among them was a file documenting the formal lineage verification process required for all royal heirs. Every document from Prince William's children was present: hospital verification, baptismal records, genealogical certification. But when he reached for the file labeled Sussex Line, it was incomplete, half empty, missing entire sections. For a moment, Charles simply stared at the empty folder, his breath heavy in the still air. He rang for his aide, asking where the remainder of the file was stored. The aide hesitated before replying, "That's the entire record, Your Majesty." That night, Charles did not sleep. He wandered the halls of Clarence House, past portraits of ancestors whose legacies rested on the very notion of royal blood. The weight of history pressed down on him. The question that now plagued him was not whether his grandchildren were loved. It was whether they were legitimate heirs to the royal name. And if they were not, then the monarchy was standing on a lie. As days turned into weeks, Charles became consumed by the need to know. His conversations grew shorter, his patience thinner. Even Queen Camilla noticed his distraction. One evening over dinner, she confronted him gently. "You've been distant," she said. "Is it the government again?" Charles shook his head slowly. "No, it's family." Camilla paused. "Harry?" He nodded. "Not just Harry. The children." Her fork froze midair. "What about them?" Charles sighed. "I'm not certain they exist as we've been told." Camilla's expression hardened, not in disbelief, but in resignation. She had seen enough of royal life to know that beneath every polished surface lies a secret waiting to explode. "You need to be sure," she said quietly. "Before you do anything, you must be absolutely sure." Her words became his mantra. In the following weeks, Charles authorized what would become one of the most discreet inquiries in royal history. It wasn't an official investigation. There would be no paper trail, no leaks, no acknowledgement. It was a fact-finding mission, handled by a handful of trusted individuals drawn from the palace's most secure departments. Their task was simple: verify the authenticity of all documentation related to Archie and Lilibet Diana. Nothing more, nothing less. The middle of this story unfolds through the king's silent turmoil. On the outside, he carried on as usual: public appearances, speeches, charity work. But those close to him noticed the tension beneath the surface. His temper grew short, his tone sharp. At night, he would spend hours in his private library, reviewing reports, letters, and photographs under the dim glow of a lamp. Occasionally, he would stop to rub his temples, whispering as though speaking to ghosts. "What have we done, Harry?" His suspicion was not born out of malice but of duty. He loved his son deeply, yet he knew that love could not blind him to his responsibilities as monarch. The truth, whatever it was, would determine not just the future of the family, but the very legitimacy of the crown. He recalled his mother's long reign, how she had navigated crises with quiet dignity. Could he do the same when the crisis came from within his own bloodline? As weeks passed, the reports trickled in, each one adding another layer to the growing web of inconsistencies. Some claimed that birth witnesses listed on official documents could not be located. Others revealed that certain digital photos released to the press lacked verifiable metadata. The most chilling discovery came when one investigator reported that the supposed hospital where Lilibet Diana was born had no record of royal or VIP-level patient security logs for the date in question. When this information reached Charles, he reportedly went silent for several minutes before finally saying, "God help us all." By now, the king's suspicion had transformed into conviction. Yet conviction without proof was dangerous. He needed something undeniable, something that could not be dismissed as rumor or manipulation. And so, he ordered the next step, private interviews with select individuals who had been involved with the Sussexes' affairs during the relevant periods. These included legal representatives, security staff, and even former aides who had quietly left the couple's employment. The accounts varied, but one thread remained constant: secrecy. Everyone described a culture of tight control around any matter related to the children. The king's breaking point came when one of these witnesses, a senior aide who had once coordinated royal travel for the Sussexes, admitted that on multiple occasions, flights scheduled for family visits were abruptly cancelled at Meghan's insistence. She said the children weren't available, the aide explained. There was always a reason: illness, fatigue, scheduling, always something. By the end of that testimony, Charles understood what his heart had resisted. The secrecy, the inconsistencies, the deliberate concealment. It all pointed to a single, terrifying conclusion. The world's perception of Archie and Lilibet might not match reality. Whether they were surrogate-born, adopted, or something even more complicated, the truth had been hidden deliberately. As the chapter closes, Charles stands at the edge of an impossible decision. His suspicion has evolved into certainty, but certainty without confession is a dangerous weapon. To reveal what he now believes would ignite a global scandal and destroy his relationship with his son forever. To remain silent would make him complicit in a lie that could corrupt the monarchy's lineage. Alone in his study, the king stares at the folder that has haunted him for months. The truth is inside, but opening it again feels like opening a wound that may never heal. The storm has begun. The king's suspicion has turned into a burden of truth, and it will soon force him to act in a way that will shake the foundations of his family and the very institution he was born to protect. For Meghan Markle, the world had always been a stage. Long before she entered the gates of Buckingham Palace, she had mastered the art of perception. How to smile just enough, how to speak with calculated empathy, how to craft a narrative that drew people in and made them believe. In Hollywood, image was everything, and in the gilded halls of royalty, it was currency. But as the storm around King Charles's suspicions began to brew, Meghan's carefully constructed illusion was about to face its ultimate test. The cameras still loved her. The lights still followed her. But behind those perfect frames of motherhood and grace was a woman fighting desperately to keep control of a truth that was slipping from her hands. To the outside world, Meghan had built the perfect post-royal life. Her mansion in Montecito gleamed in magazine spreads. Her interviews on American television glowed with curated sincerity, and her social circle included Hollywood elites, spiritual healers, and media executives. She had everything the tabloids once said she wanted: fame, freedom, and financial independence. But she also had something far more fragile, an image that depended entirely on consistency. Every photo, every video clip, every story about her family had to align with the narrative she wanted the world to believe. That she was not a runaway duchess, but a modern mother raising royal children in peace. Yet, behind that serenity, the machinery was relentless. Meghan controlled her brand with a precision that astonished even seasoned publicists. Every image of Archie and Lilibet was approved, edited, and released on her terms. Photographers who had worked with her privately said she would spend hours reviewing lighting, angles, and backgrounds before granting permission to publish. She didn't want authenticity, one insider recalled. She wanted perfection. She wanted control over every pixel of her family's story. This obsession with control became both her armor and her downfall. When King Charles began quietly questioning the authenticity of certain family details, Meghan's response was not transparency. It was defense. She saw inquiry as invasion, scrutiny as betrayal. To her, the monarchy was not a family but an institution that had rejected her. And now she believed that institution was coming for her children. It was an idea she repeated to those close to her, reinforcing the narrative of persecution. "They don't see us as human," she once allegedly told a confidant. "They see us as threats to their illusion of purity." Ironically, she had built an illusion of her own, one polished by Hollywood gloss and royal mystique. When the first murmurs of the king's private investigation reached Meghan through her inner circle, her reaction was immediate fury. According to a source close to the couple, she confronted Harry late one evening in their Montecito home. "Your father is questioning our children," she said, trembling with anger. "He's questioning me." Harry, caught between disbelief and despair, reportedly tried to calm her, insisting it was a misunderstanding. But Meghan was already strategizing. Within days, she instructed her PR team to reinforce the family's public image through a series of subtle but calculated moves. The Sussexes were photographed volunteering at a local children's charity. Meghan was featured on the cover of a lifestyle magazine discussing motherhood, and their official website began emphasizing the importance of privacy for their young family. The middle of this chapter unfolds within Meghan's Hollywood fortress, a world far removed from the decorum of the palace. Her mansion became a headquarters for brand management, complete with stylists, consultants, and image advisors. Every visitor had to sign non-disclosure agreements. Every conversation was monitored for leaks. Those who worked for her described a strange blend of warmth and fear. Meghan could be gracious, but beneath her charm was a steel-like control. "She never raised her voice," one former staffer said. "But you always knew when she was angry." The air in the room changed. That anger grew as whispers about the royal investigation intensified. Meghan began calling close friends and allies, attempting to shape the narrative before the palace could act. To producers, she framed it as another example of royal cruelty. To journalists, she hinted at institutional bias. And to Harry, she presented herself as the target of a vendetta. "They couldn't destroy me as a duchess," she allegedly told him. "So now they'll try to destroy me as a mother." Harry, torn and exhausted, believed her. To him, Meghan's pain was real, and the palace had always been cold. He saw his father's silence not as caution, but as condemnation. Meanwhile, the public continued to see only what Meghan wanted them to see. Beautiful family photos, intimate podcast recordings, carefully crafted narratives about balancing motherhood and philanthropy. But behind closed doors, cracks began to appear. Staff turnover within their household increased. Advisors resigned quietly, citing creative differences. Some whispered that the couple's obsession with secrecy was becoming unhealthy, almost paranoid. One former assistant later admitted, "Every time something went wrong, Meghan thought someone was leaking." But the truth was, there was nothing to leak, because everything had already been fabricated for show. The illusion reached its peak when Meghan organized what was supposed to be a symbolic public appearance, a televised moment of maternal authenticity. She arranged for a charity event centered on children's welfare, planning to appear alongside Archie and Lilibet for the first time in over a year. Cameras were ready, the press invited, and anticipation was high. But hours before the event, it was abruptly canceled. Officially, due to unexpected health concerns. Unofficially, those within her team whispered that something had gone wrong with the visual preparation. "The timing wasn't right," one insider claimed. "The details didn't match up." Meghan panicked. For King Charles, watching from afar, the cancellation confirmed his worst fears. Every attempt by Meghan to display authenticity seemed too polished, too rehearsed. It wasn't the behavior of a family living in peace, it was the behavior of people staging a performance. And as the evidence from his private inquiry accumulated, the illusion Meghan had built began to collapse under its own weight. In the weeks that followed, Meghan launched a counter-narrative through sympathetic media outlets. Articles appeared defending her parenting choices, accusing the monarchy of unfair scrutiny. She portrayed herself as a victim of a cold institution unwilling to accept modern motherhood. But the tone of her public appearances betrayed her calm. During one interview, her usual composure faltered when the host innocently asked about her children's schooling. Her smile tightened. "They're happy," she replied curtly, then steered the conversation away. Observers noted that she seemed defensive, almost fearful, an unusual demeanor for someone used to controlling the dialogue. The illusion was breaking. By now, even Harry sensed the growing tension. His calls to his father went unanswered, and his once loyal allies in the press had grown quiet. The more Meghan fought to preserve the narrative, the more isolated they became. Friends who once defended them publicly began avoiding involvement altogether. Inside Montecito, the atmosphere turned cold. Meghan was determined to protect the world she had built, but her control was slipping. Her husband was restless, her father-in-law suspicious, and her empire of perception was beginning to crack under the pressure of reality. The end of this chapter closes with Meghan staring out over the Pacific Ocean from her home's balcony, her reflection caught in the glass. She had everything she thought she wanted: wealth, fame, power, but all of it rested on a story that could fall apart at any moment. Somewhere across the Atlantic, a king was searching for the truth, and deep down, she knew that if he found it, no amount of Hollywood magic could save her. The illusion she created was beautiful, powerful, and convincing. But illusions, by nature, are fragile, and when the light shifts, they disappear. It happened quietly, as most world-shaking events do. One moment, everything was controlled, calculated, and calm. The next, a single image began to circulate within the palace walls. An image that would change everything. The photograph wasn't meant for public eyes. It wasn't part of Meghan and Harry's carefully curated releases. It wasn't taken by a royal photographer or authorized by their media team. It came from somewhere unexpected. Someone inside their own circle who had grown disillusioned, perhaps even fearful. A single leak, a single snapshot, but it carried the weight of an empire. The image, reportedly captured months earlier, was simple on the surface. Meghan, holding a baby, standing in a California garden. The problem wasn't what it showed, it was what it didn't. The details didn't align. The timestamp conflicted with Meghan's publicly known schedule. The child in the picture didn't match the age or appearance of Archie at the time it was supposedly taken. The photo metadata suggested it had been edited multiple times. And buried within the image's digital layers, an analyst noticed something alarming. The photograph had been composited. Two different subjects placed together seamlessly, almost imperceptibly, unless you knew what to look for. When the image reached Buckingham Palace through unofficial channels, it caused an immediate stir. The king's private secretary, after reviewing the file, ordered a digital forensic review. Within hours, specialists confirmed what many feared. The image was manipulated. Whether by oversight or intent, it was not an authentic representation of mother and child. When this information reached King Charles, his silence filled the room. He asked one question, his voice barely audible: "Who sent this?" The answer, the secretary said, was unclear. But the email that delivered the image came from an encrypted, anonymous source, a whistleblower, perhaps, or someone within the Sussex's inner circle who had seen enough. Charles didn't speak for a long time. Those in the room later said his expression was one of devastation, not anger. For all his life, he had believed that truth could coexist with mercy. Now he realized the two were at war. If this image was part of a larger deception, the monarchy wasn't simply being embarrassed, it was being used. The king reportedly closed the folder containing the analysis and said only, "We'll need to see everything. No exceptions." What followed over the next few weeks was the most secretive internal review in modern royal history. A small team of investigators, trusted by Charles personally, was assembled under strict confidentiality. Their task: trace the origins of the leak and determine the authenticity of all media relating to Archie and Lilibet. This was not an official operation. No documents were signed, no minutes kept. It was all done in whispers and shadows, under code names and silent directives. What they discovered would confirm the king's worst fears. The middle of this chapter unfolds like a thriller. Quiet rooms, encrypted files, hushed conversations in the palace gardens. The investigation began with digital records, timestamps, metadata, photo archives. What started as a single photo quickly turned into a pattern. Multiple official Sussex photos contained anomalies. The lighting conditions were inconsistent with the stated times. Shadows fell in opposite directions. Objects in the background were misaligned or duplicated, subtle errors invisible to the naked eye but unmistakable to professionals. Each inconsistency added to a growing sense of dread. These weren't random mistakes. They were deliberate edits. The investigators went further, cross-referencing the photos with known events. One image released for Archie's second birthday didn't match the season in which it was allegedly taken. Another, featuring Lilibet in a garden, showed flora not native to California during that time of year. The findings were overwhelming. The Sussexes' family imagery, it seemed, had been selectively staged or digitally altered. When the compiled report reached the king, he read it twice. The implications were enormous. To the world, the Sussexes had presented themselves as a young family living peacefully in America. To the monarchy, they were increasingly appearing as architects of an illusion. The king knew he couldn't act rashly. He couldn't accuse his son without proof beyond doubt. But he also couldn't ignore what was in front of him. "We must confirm it independently," he instructed his team. "If we're wrong, I will bear that shame myself. But if we're right..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room understood what it meant. While the palace moved quietly, Meghan and Harry's world remained unaware of the gathering storm. Meghan was busy negotiating new production deals, Harry promoting his foundation work. Yet tension hung between them. Harry had sensed his father's coldness growing. Calls that once ended with "take care" now ended abruptly. Formality had replaced warmth. Meghan, ever alert, noticed it too. "He's on to something," she told a friend one evening. "But he won't find anything. I made sure of it." Her confidence was absolute, or at least it sounded that way. But inside, she was beginning to worry. The leak had rattled her. The idea that someone within her carefully chosen circle could betray her was unthinkable. She began tightening control, canceling public appearances, revising staff contracts, and restricting access to family areas. To Harry, she framed it as a precaution. "We can't trust anyone," she said. But in truth, her greatest fear wasn't outsiders. It was exposure. The illusion she had built was delicate, and once cracks appeared, everything would crumble. Meanwhile, back in London, the king's investigators had traced the photos' origins to a now-defunct private media consulting firm in Los Angeles, one that had handled photo editing and social media strategy for high-profile clients. When questioned discreetly through intermediaries, a former employee admitted that they had assisted in image composition for a client who wanted absolute privacy for her children. The details matched the Sussexes perfectly. When asked if this meant the photos were fabricated, the employee refused to answer directly. "Let's just say," they said carefully, "we were told to make them look natural." That was all the palace needed. The king now possessed more than suspicion. He had confirmation of manipulation. He didn't yet know the full truth behind it, whether the children had been hidden for safety or whether the deception was deeper, but he knew the monarchy's integrity was at risk. "If we allow this to continue," he told his advisors, "the crown becomes complicit." The climax of this chapter arrives when the second leak occurred, this time within British media. A freelance journalist, tipped off anonymously, published a cryptic article suggesting that a senior royal family member had commissioned digital verifications of family imagery involving overseas descendants. Though names weren't mentioned, everyone knew who it referred to. The Sussex's team went into overdrive, releasing statements condemning false and malicious rumors and accusing the press of targeting their family. But the damage was done. Once the idea of deceit entered public consciousness, it couldn't be erased. In Montecito, Meghan's reaction was said to be explosive. She reportedly stormed into her office, demanding to know who had spoken to the media. "Someone wants to destroy us," she told Harry, "and your father is behind it." Harry, trapped between loyalty and disbelief, tried to defend his father, but Meghan's words cut deeper than he admitted. The house that once symbolized freedom had turned into a bunker of paranoia. Back in London, Charles sat alone with the final version of the forensic report. Every page confirmed what his heart already knew. His family had been deceived. Whether out of desperation or design, Meghan and Harry had blurred the line between reality and fiction, between truth and performance. The leak had exposed the illusion, but it had also forced his hand. As monarch, he could no longer ignore what was before him. As a father, he was breaking inside. The end of this chapter closes with Charles standing at the window of Buckingham Palace, watching the city lights flicker below. He thought of his mother's unwavering dedication to truth, his father's stoic silence, his own decades of waiting to lead. Now, at the height of his reign, his greatest test was not political, it was personal. The photo that began it all still sat on his desk, a haunting symbol of everything lost. A lie captured in perfect lighting. The leak had changed everything. What began as suspicion had now become evidence. And the king, burdened with truth, knew that the next step would not only determine the fate of his family, but the survival of the monarchy itself. The investigation began under the cover of darkness, literally and symbolically. King Charles had long been known for his measured temperament, his preference for quiet deliberation over rash action. But the stakes this time were unlike anything he had ever faced. The monarchy had weathered wars, scandals, and betrayals, yet never had its legitimacy been questioned at such an intimate level. This wasn't about politics or popularity. It was about blood, lineage, and truth. If the whispers were true, if the illusion surrounding Archie and Lilibet was more than just image manipulation, then the foundation of royal continuity itself was in jeopardy. Charles knew the monarchy could survive public ridicule, but it could not survive deceit within its own bloodline. Thus began what insiders would later refer to as the silent inquiry. There were no official orders, no signatures, no visible trail. Charles summoned only 3 people to his private chambers that night: the Lord Chamberlain, the head of royal security, and his most trusted intelligence contact, a man with deep ties to MI6. The king's instructions were brief, delivered with the steady voice of a man torn between love and duty. "We are to verify the truth," he said, "discreetly, absolutely, and without delay. If any of this leaves these walls, it ends not only careers but crowns." The team understood immediately. This was not a routine inquiry. It was an operation that would test the limits of secrecy within the British establishment. The intelligence liaison, known only as Mr. Hale in internal memos, suggested a codename for the mission, Project Clarion, a reference to the clarion call, the trumpet of truth that pierces through silence. Charles approved it without hesitation. The first step was information collection. The team began by requesting all existing legal and medical documentation pertaining to the births of Archie and Lilibet. These requests were not made directly to the Sussexes, but rather through discreet government channels. In the UK, the General Register Office was quietly queried about any official recognition of the births under royal protocols. In the US, MI6 contacts stationed in Washington and Los Angeles were tasked with tracing the authenticity of California's records. The results were confusing, fragmented, and deeply troubling. For Archie, there were multiple certificates, some redacted, others with mismatched identifiers. The listed hospital did not match known records of royal security deployment. The doctor's signature on one version of the document appeared to belong to a physician who had retired years before the date of the birth. For Lilibet, the inconsistencies were even worse. Her certificate listed a registrar's name that did not appear in any California state database. None of this was concrete proof of deceit, but the pattern of discrepancies was undeniable. As the investigation deepened, the king insisted on receiving updates personally. He met with the team at odd hours, often late at night, sometimes pacing as they presented findings. The stress began to show. He became quieter during public appearances, his eyes carrying the weight of invisible burdens. To those around him, it appeared as if the king was haunted by something unseen, something that gnawed at his conscience. The middle of this chapter delves into the intricacies of the secret investigation itself. Project Clarion extended far beyond paperwork. Charles authorized discreet surveillance, digital, financial, and even social, of key individuals connected to the Sussex's inner circle. Through MI6 intermediaries, the team traced financial transfers from Archwell-affiliated accounts to small, unregistered firms specializing in image manipulation and surrogate medical services. These firms operated quietly, often under shell company names. One such payment, logged months before Lilibet's supposed birth, was flagged for privacy consultancy and digital alteration services. When this information reached Charles, he demanded immediate clarification. Could it not be standard security? He asked, almost pleading. The investigators shook their heads. The services described were not typical of digital protection. They involved biometric masking, synthetic imaging, and metadata suppression. In layman's terms, the payments were connected to technologies used to alter or conceal real-world data. As the evidence grew, so did the king's sense of dread. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that someone had gone to great lengths to construct an alternate version of reality. The team eventually secured corroborating information from a confidential source in Los Angeles, an individual employed briefly by a clinic known for discreet surrogacy arrangements. The source described a high-profile international client who had insisted on total secrecy and declined all traditional documentation. The time frames aligned almost perfectly with both Sussex births. Charles listened to the report in silence. When the presentation ended, he stood, walked to the window, and whispered, "It's worse than I thought." The investigation's next phase involved cross-referencing travel and communication data. While MI6 operatives reviewed flight manifests, palace analysts examined private correspondence between Harry, Meghan, and royal aides during the periods in question. Several emails stood out, particularly one in which Meghan's assistant instructed a legal